Now, I can't emphasize this enough. Nothing has been finalized. We are still doing our work and gathering input from our players, our partners, and other key stakeholders.
Somewhere inside a hospitality building at Muirfield Village last month, a private meeting happened. No cameras, no live stream, no official transcript. But by the time the players walked out of that room, something had shifted. And inside 24 hours, it was already leaking out through interviews, insider reports, and a Golf Channel segment that made it clear this wasn't just another schedule update. We don't know every word that was said behind those closed doors. Nobody outside that room does. But here's what we do know. And it might be even more unsettling than a leaked transcript. We know Jack Nicklaus, 86 years old, stood in front of reporters the day before and said something he almost never says. We know he walked into that room the next day to confront the man running his sport. We know the PGA Tour's new CEO has a plan that, by his own admission, will cut tournaments most of us grew up watching down to a minor league status by 2028. And we know that 4 days after that meeting, 4 of the biggest names in golf pulled out of a tournament that's been running for 80 years. Something is breaking apart in professional golf right now, in real time, and most fans have no idea it's happening. So let's get into it. To understand why that meeting mattered, you have to go back 1 day earlier, to Nicklaus's press conference at his own tournament, the Memorial. A reporter asked him a fairly routine question about the PGA Tour's schedule, and Nicklaus did something he rarely does. He opened his mouth to say he wouldn't answer, and then answered anyway. "I don't want to comment on the tour's schedule because I'm not exactly in favor of what they're doing right now," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "I want to sit down with Brian and Jay and have that conversation." Read that again. The most decorated golfer in history, a man who has spent decades being carefully diplomatic in public, just told a room full of reporters that he disapproves of how his own tour is being run and that he intends to say so directly to the CEO's face. He didn't stop there. Nicklaus pointed straight at the Cognizant Classic, a tournament his own charitable foundation is tied to, and laid out the problem in blunt terms. It's boxed in on the calendar between Pebble Beach, the LA event, Bay Hill, and the Players' Championship. "What chance does that tournament have?" he asked. "It sits right in the middle of those. They don't have a chance." Then he went further, talking about player burnout. In his own playing days, he said, he could go 3 weeks in a row before he needed to recharge. "I think everybody needs to recharge their batteries," he said. "To jam it all in one period of time and then leave the rest of the year open, I think it's tough." That's not nostalgia talking. That's one of the smartest minds the sport has ever produced, looking at a compressed, top-heavy schedule and warning that it's going to break something. The smaller tournaments, the players' bodies, or both. And then he added one more line, almost in passing, that turned out to be the real headline. "I probably shouldn't have brought it up. I'll get chastised for that later." He knew. He knew that what he'd just said out loud was going to cause a stir. And 24 hours later, he walked into a room to say it to Brian Rolapp directly. So who is Brian Rolapp, and why does one meeting with him have players and fans this on edge? Rolapp spent over 2 decades at the NFL before taking over as PGA Tour CEO. His background isn't golf, it's media rights, broadcast deals, and squeezing maximum commercial value out of a sports calendar. He was not brought in to protect 80 years of tradition. He was brought in to grow revenue in a world where the tour is competing with LIV Golf for attention, money, and the biggest names in the sport. Rolapp has been public about his guiding principles: parity, scarcity, and simplicity. In plain terms, fewer events, each one bigger and more valuable, and a calendar that's easier for a casual fan to follow. Here's where it gets concrete. Rolapp has laid out, in his own words at press conferences, a plan to roughly double the number of signature-style events, moving toward a system of 2 tiers, often described as Track 1 and Track 2. Track 1 would house somewhere in the range of 21 to 26 elevated events: the majors, the players, the postseason, team events, and a much larger group of $20 million purse tournaments. Track 2 would be everything else. On paper, that sounds like a bigger pie for everyone. In practice, it means a hard line gets drawn, and the events on the wrong side of that line start to lose fields, sponsors, and relevance almost overnight. That's exactly what Nicklaus was pointing at when he brought up the Cognizant Classic. Once a tournament gets labeled second tier, the best players stop showing up, and once the best players stop showing up, everything else follows: TV ratings, sponsorship dollars, and eventually, in the worst case, the tournament's survival. This is the collision course that brought Nicklaus and Rolapp into the same room. One man built his life's work, a tournament, a tour, a set of traditions, over half a century. The other man was hired specifically to modernize that same tour for a media landscape that looks nothing like it did in 1968, when Nicklaus helped found the tour in the first place. Neither one of them is wrong exactly. That's what makes this so uncomfortable. Rolapp isn't crazy for thinking golf needs to compete for attention in a world of supercharged, event-driven sports leagues. Nicklaus isn't crazy for saying you can't just delete 80 years of history because it doesn't fit a spreadsheet. But somebody's vision is going to lose, and every player on tour right now is caught in the middle of figuring out whose. Now here's the part where I have to be straight with you, because a lot of what's floating around online about this meeting is dramatized past the point of being verifiable. And I'm not going to pass off invented dialogue as fact. What's confirmed, Nicklaus and Rolapp met for the first time at Muirfield Village during Memorial Week, alongside Commissioner Jay Monahan. It happened in front of players, in the context of a player advisory council session. Rolapp used the meeting to walk through more detail on his Track 1, Track 2 plan, the same plan he'd teased publicly months earlier, ahead of a policy board vote expected around the Travelers' Championship in late June. What's not confirmed, and what I won't pretend to know, the exact tone in that room, whether Rolapp dodged Nicklaus's questions or what was said word for word. Reporters who cover the tour closely have openly said they'd love to have been a fly on the wall for that conversation, which tells you something on its own. The details didn't leak. For a meeting between the greatest player in the sport's history and the executive rewriting its future, that silence from the room itself is the story. Think about what that means. 40-plus players were in that space. Golf's locker room is not exactly known for keeping secrets. Leaks happen constantly about equipment, about swing changes, about who's not talking to who. But the substance of this particular conversation stayed contained. That's either extremely disciplined players or a conversation careful enough that nobody wanted their name attached to repeating it. Whichever it is, one thing is clear. Something about that room changed the temperature around this issue. Because 4 days later, we got a very public, very concrete signal of just how fragile the current system already is. 4 of the biggest names in American golf skipped the Charles Schwab Challenge at Colonial this year: Scotty Scheffler, Jordan Spieth, Brooks Koepka, and Wyndham Clark. This is a tournament with 80 years of history. Scheffler is from Texas. Fans there consider him one of their own. Spieth has an emotional hometown connection to Texas golf that goes back to his amateur days. And yet both skipped it, not out of disinterest, but because the schedule left them no room to safely play it. Wyndham Clark had just won the Byron Nelson with real momentum behind him. He still withdrew, choosing recovery over pushing his body further. Brooks Koepka's case is its own small case study in how fragile this system has become. As a returning LIV player, he doesn't get automatic access to signature events. He has to qualify through the Aon Swing 5 standings, and he was sitting roughly 20 points outside the cutoff. If he'd played Colonial and then qualified into the Memorial, he'd have been staring down 7 consecutive weeks of tournament golf right before the US Open. So he pulled out to protect himself. But here's the part that shows how interconnected and how brittle this whole ecosystem is. When Koepka withdrew, the field lost a spot that would have gone to the first alternates, Zach Blair and Patrick Fishburne. One player's decision to protect his own body, made hundreds of miles away, directly cost 2 other players a start. That's not a hypothetical about the future of golf. That already happened this year, because of exactly the scheduling crunch Nicklaus was warning about. This is the pattern Rolapp's critics are worried about. When the calendar rewards a shrinking number of mega events, the players rationally protect themselves for those weeks, and everything else, no matter how historic, becomes optional. Colonial survived this year. But if the Track 1, Track 2 model locks in the way it's currently being described, tournaments like it are exactly the ones left exposed. It would be easy to write this off as an old legend being sentimental about the way things used to be. Nicklaus himself seemed to anticipate that reaction. He joked he'd get chastised for even bringing it up. But look at what he actually said, piece by piece. He didn't just say he missed the old tour, he made a structural argument. Pack too many marquee events into too short a stretch, and you get player fatigue, higher injury risk, and a lopsided calendar with a dead zone the rest of the year. He named a specific tournament and showed exactly how it gets squeezed by its neighbors on the schedule. And he pointed out correctly that this isn't hypothetical anymore. It's already visible in who shows up and who doesn't. Rolapp's counter-argument is just as coherent. Professional sports leagues that thrive commercially, the NFL being the clearest example he knows firsthand, tend to run on scarcity. Fewer, bigger events create more urgency, more media value, and more reasons for casual fans to tune in instead of losing track of a 40-plus event season. If golf wants to compete for attention against leagues built entirely around that principle, some version of consolidation might be unavoidable. The problem is that golf doesn't work like a league with one season and one trophy. It's a patchwork of tournaments, many independently run, many with their own decades of local identity, charities, communities, families who've gone to the same event every May for 40 years. Compress that too aggressively, and you're not just trimming a schedule. You're deciding, top down, which parts of the sport's history get to keep existing. That's the real tension underneath all of this. It's not really Nicklaus versus Rolapp. It's two completely different definitions of what the PGA Tour is for. A collection of storied championships built up over generations, or a streamlined commercial product optimized for the next decade of media deals. The next real checkpoint is the Tour's policy board meeting, expected around the Travelers' Championship in late June, where more detail on the Track 1, Track 2 restructuring is likely to be locked in. If the reporting on player sentiment is accurate, a large portion of the current field has already signaled they're comfortable with some version of this model, which means Nicklaus, for all his standing in the game, may be arguing a position that's already lost the room. That's what makes this moment matter beyond one awkward meeting at Muirfield Village. It's not really a question of whether Rolapp will listen to Nicklaus. It's a question of whether the PGA Tour, as a 50-plus-year institution, is willing to let its own founding generation's warnings slow down a plan that's already gaining momentum inside the locker room. Nicklaus is 86. He said it himself. He's not doing this for his own career or even his own tournament. He's doing it, he said, for the players in that room who are going to live with these decisions for the next 15 or 20 years. Whether they were listening and whether it changes anything is the part of this story nobody can answer yet. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you think the Tour should slow down and protect events like Colonial and the Cognizant Classic? Or is Rolapp right that golf has to consolidate to compete for attention in 2026? Drop your take below, and if you want to see how this plays out at the Travelers' Championship policy vote, subscribe because this is very much not finished.